Welcome, dear viewers, to the world today. Ladies and gentlemen, there are days when the world does not simply move through scattered headlines. There are days when a single attack at sea, one statement from the White House, one airstrike in the Middle East, or one wave of attacks in Ukraine can shake global energy markets, alter the calculations of major powers, and leave millions of ordinary people living in uncertainty. Today, we will take a closer look at an international landscape that is heating up by the hour, from the Strait of Hormuz, often described as the energy lifeline of the world, to the conflict between Israel and Hezbollah, from the effort to rebuild Gaza after 2 years of war, to the trade disagreements between Europe and the United States, and then to the Russia-Ukraine front, where underground battles and drone attacks are reshaping the nature of modern warfare. The central question is this: is the world moving towards stability? Or is it entering a new phase of disorder, where every flashpoint can trigger a wider global crisis? Now, let us begin with the most important developments of the day here on the world today. Ladies and gentlemen, the first focus of today's program is the Strait of Hormuz. This is not merely an ordinary maritime route. It is a vital gateway for global oil flows, where every security incident can immediately affect energy prices, transportation costs, inflation, and the daily lives of hundreds of millions of people around the world. According to the original script, an oil tanker operated by China was attacked near the entrance to the Strait of Hormuz. What makes this incident significant is not only the attack itself, but also the identity of the vessel. It was a Chinese tanker. For many years, China has been seen as having a relatively special position in the Middle East. Beijing maintains deep economic relations with many countries in the region, including Iran. As a result, Chinese commercial vessels have often been expected to enjoy a higher level of safety compared with ships from some Western countries. But this latest incident reveals a deeply troubling reality: when conflict escalates, there is no longer any absolutely safe zone. In the past, Chinese shipping companies may have believed that diplomatic ties and economic interests could shield them from the cycle of violence. Now, that belief has been shaken. An attack on a Chinese oil tanker is not just a maritime incident. It is a warning signal that tensions in Hormuz have moved beyond the framework of a regional confrontation and may now touch the interests of the world's largest economies. This is especially dangerous because global energy markets are extremely sensitive to geopolitical risks. When an oil tanker is attacked, insurance companies raise their premiums. When insurance costs rise, shipping costs increase. When shipping costs rise, oil prices, gas prices, commodity prices, and even food prices can be pushed higher. In the end, those affected are not only governments or energy corporations, but also families, small businesses, workers, and consumers who pay every day for fuel, electricity, cooking gas, and basic living expenses. Even more notably, this incident occurred while Iran has been working to restore oil and gas facilities damaged during its conflict with the United States and Israel. Iran's oil minister, as mentioned in the original script, said Tehran is prioritizing the rapid restoration of critical energy infrastructure. This shows that Iran understands very clearly that energy is not only a source of revenue, but also a strategic instrument. For Iran, oil and gas are the lifeblood of the economy. For the world, energy supplies from the Middle East remain an irreplaceable part of the global energy balance. Therefore, every attack on energy infrastructure, every explosion on a cargo ship, and every declaration about blocking or reopening a sea lane can become a form of political leverage. We need to look deeper here. When a country controls, or has major influence over, a strategic maritime route such as the Strait of Hormuz, it does not only control territory or waters, it controls market psychology. It can move oil prices with a single statement. It can force energy importing nations to adjust their reserve plans. And it can compel major powers to return to the negotiating table. That is why Hormuz today is not merely a story about Iran, the United States, or Israel. It is a global story. Ladies and gentlemen, while the Strait of Hormuz continues to heat up, another flashpoint is also flaring again: Lebanon and the confrontation between Israel and Hezbollah. According to the original script, Lebanese President Joseph Aoun called for national unity and emphasized the need to protect the country and avoid repeating the mistakes of the past. This is a deeply political message. Lebanon is a small country, but it sits in an extremely sensitive position, Caught in multiple layers of conflict, the Israel-Hezbollah confrontation, the competition for influence between Iran and its regional rivals, pressure from the international community, and long-standing internal divisions. What is particularly noteworthy is that Lebanon's prime minister stated that the country is not pursuing normalization with Israel, but rather peace. This wording matters. Normalization usually implies the establishment of full diplomatic relations, open cooperation, and a deeper level of mutual recognition. Peace, in this context, may mean a ceasefire, border stability, reduced fighting, and protection for civilians. Lebanon appears to be walking a very thin line. On one hand, it does not want to be seen as making concessions to Israel. On the other, it can no longer afford a prolonged war, because the cost to civilians is simply too high. On the ground, however, the situation paints a much darker picture. Israel continues to carry out airstrikes against targets it says are linked to Hezbollah. A senior commander of the Radwan force was reportedly killed in an attack in the southern suburbs of Beirut. This is a significant escalation, because Beirut is not only the capital of Lebanon, but also the country's political, social, and psychological symbol. When war reaches the capital, people no longer experience conflict as something distant along the border. They feel it on their streets, in their apartments, in schools, in hospitals, and in every emergency evacuation. And that is the greatest tragedy of every war. Those who do not make the decisions are often the ones who pay the heaviest price. The casualty figures mentioned in the original script show that fighting between Israel and Hezbollah has killed thousands of people and forced more than 1 million people in Lebanon to leave their homes. Each side may have its own arguments about security, self-defense, or retaliation, but from a humanitarian perspective, the question remains unchanged. How many more civilians must lose their homes before the parties accept a serious path toward peace? Ladies and gentlemen, if Lebanon is the story of a country stretched between war and peace, then Gaza is the story of near-total devastation after 2 years of conflict. According to the original script, a report released by the World Bank, the United Nations, and the European Union found that direct damage and economic losses in Gaza have exceeded $57 billion, while reconstruction needs over the next 5 years could surpass $71 billion. These figures are not merely statistics. Behind $57 billion are collapsed homes, paralyzed hospitals, schools without classrooms, bankrupt businesses, separated families, and children growing up among ruins. Housing is the most severely affected sector. More than 1.2 million people have lost their homes. Around 371,000 housing units have been affected, most of them completely destroyed. When a community loses its homes, it does not only lose shelter, it loses memories, lifetime savings, a sense of safety, and the foundation needed to begin again. The health and education systems have also been devastated. If hospitals cannot function, the wounded cannot receive timely treatment. If schools cannot operate, an entire generation of children risks having its future stolen. If electricity, water, and sanitation infrastructure are destroyed, the risk of disease rises. And if businesses cannot operate, the local economy falls into a cycle of dependence on aid. The most worrying point is that rebuilding Gaza is not only a financial problem. Money alone cannot rebuild a place if security is not guaranteed, if construction materials cannot enter, if governance remains unclear, and if the parties have not reached a sustainable political agreement. In other words, Gaza does not only need bricks and concrete to rebuild houses. Gaza needs a foundation of peace stable enough for people to return, businesses to reopen, children to go back to school, and doctors to keep hospitals running. Ladies and gentlemen, leaving the Middle East, we now turn to Europe, where a trade dispute with the United States is revealing deep divisions within the European Union. According to the original script, the European Parliament and the country holding the rotating presidency of the European Union have not reached an agreement on removing tariffs on American industrial goods under a previous arrangement. Meanwhile, the United States has increased pressure by threatening higher tariffs on Europe's automobile industry. The issue here is not only tariffs. It is about the balance of economic power across the Atlantic. The United States wants to protect its industrial interests. Europe wants to preserve its export markets, especially the automobile sector, which is a pillar of Germany and several other member economies. But within the European Union, there is no complete agreement on how to respond. Some parties want to quickly implement the agreement to avoid a larger trade conflict. Others want stronger safeguards to prevent Europe from being placed in a weaker position under pressure from Washington. This is Europe's familiar dilemma: how to maintain its alliance with the United States while also protecting its own strategic autonomy. In a world marked by polarization, reshaped supply chains, and intensifying industrial competition, any tariff agreement is no longer only a trade issue. It is also a political message: who is making concessions, who is shaping the rules of the game, and who will pay the price if tensions escalate. Ladies and gentlemen, returning to the Middle East, one of the most notable points in the original script is the inconsistency in the messaging of President Donald Trump's administration toward Iran. At times, Washington says the ceasefire remains in place. At other times, threats emerge about resuming military action. At one moment, the United States wants to show that it is in control of the situation. But soon afterward, Gulf allies express concern because they are uncertain about Washington's real strategy. In international politics, consistency is a form of power. When a major power sends clear signals, allies can make predictions, opponents can calculate their responses, and markets can remain more stable. But when messages change constantly, every side enters a defensive posture. Gulf states are especially sensitive to this. They rely on American security guarantees, but they also live next to Iran. If the United States acts too aggressively, they may face Iranian retaliation. If the United States withdraws or changes its position too quickly, they may feel abandoned. That is the security paradox of the Gulf. The more a country relies on an outside power for protection, the more it risks being drawn into that power's conflicts. Against this backdrop, Iran announced conditions for ensuring safe passage through the Strait of Hormuz. Tehran said that once external threats are neutralized and new procedures are applied, travel through this strategic waterway will gradually become stable again. This message has two layers. The public layer is that Iran wants to present itself as capable of ensuring maritime security. The deeper layer is that Iran wants to assert practical control over this route. In other words, Tehran is sending a message: if the world wants Hormuz to be safe, Iran's interests and conditions must be taken into account. At the same time, Iran called on the United Nations Security Council to reject a US-sponsored draft resolution on freedom of navigation in Hormuz. Iran argued that the only viable solution is to end the conflict, lift the maritime blockade, and restore traffic. Meanwhile, France proposed an international mission to secure maritime routes, separating the Hormuz issue from the broader conflict. This suggests that Europe wants to play the role of mediator, or at least a party capable of reducing tensions. France and Britain are promoting a multinational escort initiative aimed at restoring confidence among shipping companies, lowering insurance costs, and returning trade flows to normal. But the question is this: can an international mission operate effectively if the United States, Iran, and Israel have still not reached a basic political agreement? At sea, warships can escort commercial vessels, but on the strategic chessboard, no escort fleet can replace a durable diplomatic settlement. Ladies and gentlemen, while the Middle East is shaking energy markets, Europe continues to closely monitor the war between Russia and Ukraine. And there, the war is entering a phase that is both old and new: fighting underground. Supported by drones, guided bombs, missiles, and tactics designed to exhaust air defenses. According to the original script, fighting around Konstantinovka in Donetsk is becoming a new hotspot. This area is part of Ukraine's defensive belt in the east, where underground structures, tunnels, and fortified defensive systems have been built to resist Russian advances. Urban warfare is always brutal, but underground warfare is even more terrifying. When soldiers fight in tunnels, visibility is limited, communication can be interrupted, the risk of encirclement is high, and every explosion can collapse an exit route. It is not only a battle of firepower, it is a battle of nerves, endurance, and survival. Russia is reportedly using underground infiltration tactics, attempting to enter or destroy Ukraine's underground defensive systems. Heavy bombs, including the Fab 3000 mentioned in the original script, are described as tools used to collapse fortified structures. If this occurs on a large scale, it could turn underground shelters from defensive advantages into deadly traps for those inside. However, It is also important to recognize that Ukraine will not easily abandon strategic towns in Donetsk. For Kyiv, every stronghold in the east has not only military value, but also political and psychological importance. Holding a city means slowing Russia's advance. But the price is high: casualties, exhaustion, supply shortages, and constant pressure on air defenses. Another crucial point is that Russia is intensifying missile and drone attacks in an effort to wear down Ukraine's air defense system. According to the original script, Ukrainian officials say Russia is conducting short waves of attacks both day and night, using decoy drones to force Ukrainian air defense units to respond continuously. This is a highly practical tactic. Not every drone needs to hit a target. If it forces the enemy to activate radar, launch interceptor missiles, mobilize crews, lose sleep, lose operational rhythm, and consume ammunition, then the decoy drone has already fulfilled its mission. In modern warfare, air defenses are not only attacked by missiles, they can also be exhausted through volume, tempo, and psychological pressure. If a country must use expensive missiles to shoot down cheap drones, then a war of attrition favors the side with greater mass production capacity. This is why drones, once seen as supporting weapons, have now become one of the central tools of modern war. This situation is becoming even more tense as Russia prepares for Victory Day events, while Ukraine sends a tough message regarding the security of the military parade in Moscow. According to the original script, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said Russia rejected a genuine ceasefire and continued to intensify military operations. Meanwhile, Moscow proposed a limited ceasefire to serve its commemorative events. Here, both sides are using the idea of a ceasefire as a political tool. Russia wants a temporary pause that benefits its image and domestic security during a major national event. Ukraine argues that such a short-term ceasefire does not reflect a genuine desire for peace, but rather a selective pause. This shows that the distance between the two sides remains very wide. When even a ceasefire becomes part of information warfare, real peace still lacks the foundation it needs to take shape. Ladies and gentlemen, looking at today's overall picture, we can see that the world is facing multiple layers of instability at the same time. In the Middle East, the Strait of Hormuz has become a strategic bottleneck for global energy. An attack on a Chinese oil tanker shows that the conflict has moved beyond conventional boundaries and has touched the interests of major economic powers. In Lebanon, the Israel-Hezbollah confrontation continues to place civilians in the cycle of violence, while the Lebanese government tries to find a path to peace without yet having sufficient political and security conditions. In Gaza, damage figures worth tens of billions of dollars reflect only a small part of the humanitarian disaster. Reconstruction cannot truly begin without sustainable peace. In Europe, trade disagreements with the United States show that even long-standing allies are recalculating their interests in a more competitive world. In the Gulf, America's allies are worried about shifting messages from Washington, while Iran seeks to turn Hormuz into a strategic card. And in Ukraine, the war continues to evolve into harsher forms: underground fighting, decoy drones, heavy bombs, and tactics designed to exhaust air defenses. What do all these developments have in common? They show that the world is living in a period where the line between regional and global crises is becoming increasingly blurred. An explosion in Hormuz can affect fuel prices in Asia. An airstrike in Beirut can alter calculations in Washington, Tehran, and Tel Aviv. A drone attack in Ukraine can force Europe to increase defense spending. A tariff dispute can affect millions of jobs in the automobile industry. No crisis now stands completely alone. That is why following world affairs today requires more than knowing what happened. We must understand why it matters, who benefits, who pays the price, and what it could lead to next. Ladies and gentlemen, if there is one major message to take from today's program, it is this: the world urgently needs mechanisms to manage crises before flashpoints move beyond control. Hormuz needs freedom of navigation, but freedom of navigation cannot be protected by warships alone. Lebanon needs peace, but peace cannot exist if armed forces outside the state continue to operate alongside national authority. Gaza needs reconstruction, but reconstruction cannot succeed if the roots of conflict remain unresolved. Ukraine needs defense, but a prolonged war of attrition will continue to exhaust both sides. Europe needs autonomy, but autonomy will be difficult to achieve if internal divisions persist under external pressure. The world today does not lack weapons. It lacks trust. It does not lack strong statements. It lacks agreements that can actually be implemented. It does not lack military alliances. It lacks diplomatic bridges strong enough to pull the parties out of the cycle of retaliation. And that is why the world today will continue to closely follow these developments in the next programs. Because every global event, whether it happens in a distant strait, a bombed-out city, or a trade negotiation room, can eventually affect our daily lives, energy prices, living costs, jobs, regional security, and the future of the global economy. Ladies and gentlemen, this brings today's program to a close. Thank you for spending your time with the world today. If you find this program useful, please continue to join us in the next broadcasts, where we do not only review the news, but also analyze the deeper movements behind every major event. We wish you a peaceful day, a clear mind amid global uncertainty, and a broad perspective on the changing world. Goodbye, and we look forward to seeing you again in the next episode of The World Today.